And as you must know by now, no one can ignore what Karen says, so we have to begin now. Uh, if I look at my phone, it's only because I'm looking at the agenda and the names of the speakers, not because I'm texting people while I'm on the panel. It's going to be a really exciting session. I'm delighted to be here, bright and early. Um, I know energies might be flagging by this time at the COP, but this session will surely reinvigorate everyone. We have 5 fantastic speakers. Each of the speakers will have precisely 3 minutes each, at which point they will be gently cut off after 3 minutes. That's just to make sure that after everyone's spoken on the panel, we have a lively, informal, and engaging discussion with everyone that's in the room. We recognize that we're not the only experts on this topic. We're just the experts who are sitting on this side of the room. All of you have a lot of insights and expertise that we'd like to draw on. That's the ethos of the Resilience Hub. The session today is on, it's called From Silos to Synergy. Congratulations for such a catchy title, whoever came up with it. I'm very jealous. And it's a dialogue on universal access to risk and resilience insight and tools. So our first speaker is Dr. Animesh Kumar from the UNDRR. Animesh, the floor is yours for 3 minutes, but do tell us before you start who you are, what you do in a few seconds.
Thanks a lot, and I can sense Karen's terror in this room as of now. So I will not take a lot of time in introducing myself. I'm the head of the UN Office for Disaster Reductions, Bonn office under the Risk Knowledge Branch. And basically my office is responsible for issues on climate data and M&E of early warnings for all. So very quickly, I'll move to the next slide, please. But basically, I would try to see what does it mean from the data point of view in terms of silos to synergy and how data can become a common denominator to facilitate synergies across different international agendas, but also to help implementation. So I would focus more on the data on loss and damage, basically. One of the key things why we need such data is to understand the impact of climate change. If we don't have the right evidence, we don't want to make we can't make a very strong case of moving this forward. But also very important to understand as 2 major decisions have already been taken on loss and damage. And the loss and damage agenda is now moving on from just being an agenda of the activists to becoming a substantive and technical agenda. Soon we will need to quantify losses and damages to better understand where are disasters happening, where are climatic events happening, who is getting affected, what are the intersectionality of impact, and what are the hotspots? I mean, these are some of the key questions that we need to answer. And for that, we need a very structured, standardized set of data at national and subnational levels. We also need to move towards the futuristic risk models. But to do so, we also need the historical data to calibrate those models. And this is something, again, for which we need the data. And as the early warnings for all is setting its foot and moving forward, we just had a major report launch at this COP by the SG of the UN. We would also need to understand a few things. So for that, I will move to the next slide on making a very strong use case of how early warning systems can be further informed. Before that, we have understanding the need for such data. 30 years ago, we established a very simplistic tool called as Inventar that has been in existence, and because of the simplicity and the way we have nurtured this whole model, it is currently being used by 110 countries. And all of these countries are actually have officialized this data and collecting at a very level of event, so where the incidents are happening. It's all government-owned in most cases, and with the Sendai framework, it has also been further officialized. Next slide, please. So in the context of early warning system, one of the few things that we definitely would want to know is what types of hazards are present in a country, what are the respective impacts, where are they happening, and if we have answers to these questions, we can actually say that which are the hazards should be monitored, and how do we prioritize them at the localized scale. And if we don't have the right data, we can't do it. So this is what we're trying to do, taking, for example, this Ethiopian example. Next slide, please. Once we also know the past impacts, we can also informs the triggers for anticipatory action as well. This is something which we need to work further on. Next slide. So recognizing that there are challenges for a system which is 30 years old, next slide, we are currently having a very innovative partnership with UNDP and WMO to develop a new system, which is currently in the process. And we already have developed the prototype of the new system, and we expect the new system to have not only the technical aspects, but an overall governance aspect as well. Next slide. So that's the model. We are trying to link hazardous event in terms of the pre-event data, but also the post-event impact as well. Next slide. These are one quick point before I end, that it's not just about collection of data, but also establishing the right governance mechanism, data standards, and methodologies for a systematic collection and analysis of data. Next. And this is the process. We should have the new system very soon. Next. And we have been conducting a very structured process, including through workshops in Bonn. You can see some of you might have already been there. And with that, I conclude my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Animesh, for that whistle-stop tour of all the exciting work that you're up to. We're going to have a chance for question and answers. So please, everyone in the audience, make a note of what you'd like to grill Animesh on. I'm going to move to the second speaker, Abena. You're a senior sustainability officer with the Ministry of Finance in Ghana. And the floor is yours for 3 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here to represent Ghana and tell you about the work we've been doing with the GRMA as part of the in-country process with the Global Shield. So Ghana launched its in-country process in July 2023. And during the workshops that were organized, we came up with 3 priority areas for further risk analytics and potential interventions in the field of climate and disaster risk finance and insurance. And these areas were climate risk impacts on agriculture, coastal flooding and erosion related to tropical storms and its impact on vulnerable coastal communities, and urban flooding. And in formulating the gap analysis that would inform the range of financial solutions in disaster risk financing and ensuring financial resilience, the GRMA worked with the Ministry of Finance team with a cross-section of sectors. We had the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Environment, Science and Technology. We worked with the National Disaster Agency. We also had civil society. We worked with the Ghana Meteorological Agency and also worked with the Africa Risk Capacity, amongst others. The focus had to do with, for example, looking at agriculture. Agriculture is the dominant economic sector in Ghana. And the reason why this was important was because although we had a number of interventions already existing, we thought that there'll be an opportunity to scale up if we did a good job with the gap analysis that GRMA helped us to do. We also figured that in order to ensure that the work that we had to do with the Global Shield would move along quickly, we focused on areas that had had some kind of preliminary work already done. So it's been instructive working with the GRMA team because we do have data available, but the analytics have not been considered in the sense that helps us build on what is required for financial resilience. We've been thinking about it mostly in terms of social interventions, and so this exercise has been truly instructive. And it also has helped us to build cross-sectoral bonds that has us thinking about an ongoing process to build on what has been put together so far for the gap analysis so that we can continue to work towards having like a pipeline of projects that enables us to tap into disaster risk financing.
Thank you so much for that rich intervention and for sticking to time. There are a few things to be unpacked that I hope to get to in the question and answers. We'd love to learn more about the GRMA and the Global Shield, and I think Nick is here. I'm going to turn to him in the question and answers. Turning to our third speaker for our third lightning talk. Delighted to welcome Teresa Makwara, who's the director and founder of Zimbabwe Parents of Handicapped Children Association, Huairou Commission. Teresa, the floor is yours for 3 minutes, and I think we have some slides for you.
Okay, my name is Teresa Makwara. I said before, I'm working with Wairo Commission and a member of Wairo Commission. We've been moving, our grassroots women have been moving from silos to working with other partners and to continue implement the change of resilience building projects in our communities by our Diamond framework. As grassroots women, we've entered into partnership with the Agriculture Extension and Services Environment and Management, agents of Ministry of Women Affairs, traditional leaders, policymakers, and Zimbabwe water authorities to implement led resilience building in our communities. Next slide, please. Our grassroots women tools were that we've been doing mapping. The mapping exercise was that used to serve the surveys to understand the challenges faced by grassroots women affected by disasters and such as climate change, flooding, cyclones in our communities, and cholera. We also identify the grassroots women's trainings and capacity development needs. This is a very good indicator that we gather information from stakeholders who are available on opportunities for grassroots affected by disasters in our communities. Next slide, please. We also offer them grassroots, the grassroots women serve their leadership and advocacy. This leadership and advocacy is working training that women affairs and fellow women movements work together so that we impart public speaking to our grassroots women in their communities and engage stakeholders, the grassroots women affected by disasters. So these grassroots women, our grassroots women are able to facilitate and establish grassroots women resilience building peer pressure groups. Next slide, please. We do what we call local-to-local dialogues. This local-to-local dialogues is a platform of bringing together our local leaders and traditional leaders, community leaders, and grassroots women to dialogue on water, land rights, over water access, and natural resources. This will usually affect the women. This is a collective voices of grassroots women, and the women are being heard and equally respected at community development through strategic partnership with the Ministry of Women Affairs. Next slide. We are doing resilience building as a livelihoods. That it means that in the ministries we have these agents of change, Ministry of Women Affairs, traditional leaders, policymakers, and Zimbabwe Authority. In implementing grassroots women-led resilience projects, we also have that source of inputs, equipment, seeds, and organic manure, small tools like trainings. We initiate our vegetable gardens and also to make sure that we're also water drilling. We have also this tool of advocates campaign. We influence positive change. Women affected by climate are now collectively working together in influencing policy change. Practice believing opinions and also protest that marginalized grassroots in our communities are also economic empowerment and in resilience building. Next slide, please. Also, if movement building, our grassroots women organize internal and external buildings, and also that they are now learning on peer learning exchange and visits where they share information, knowledge, and practical skills and lived experiences in their communities. We network and build linkages, and as organizations at HSA is working with like-minded stakeholders, grassroots such as traditional leaders and government departments to ensure ownership and sustainability and resilience. Next slide, please. We have partners, Ministry of Women Affairs, Ministry of Local Government, Ministry of Climate and Water, Meteorological Department, local authorities, farmers, and Civil Protection Unit, media, and other environmental changes. Next slide. We have challenges, usually. Resilience building, you know, our women, they are being affecting when it comes to issues of resilience building. So male dominance is in a decision forum. With less and less, grassroots women can become more contributors and partner in finding the lasting solutions to food and security. Next slide. We have learned from peer exchange programs, networking meetings, information and exchange programs. And these are we are doing the best, documenting best practices and practical lessons learned into practical knowledge. Next slide. You can see the pictures when we have the traditional leaders. Next slide. We're also doing resilience building to celebrate the donation of land by villagers. We're also doing resilience building, receiving cutting seeds at the ZPSA office in our organization. We showcase our Madumbe during the day of commemoration of women.
Great, Teresa. I think we might leave it there. No, thank you so much for your intervention. You took a bit more time, but you showed us some really powerful pictures. So thank you, and we'll come back to allow you to add more detail as we continue. Over to Manu, who's the founder of Seeds.
Thank you, Aditya. And very quickly, I'm the co-founder for Seeds, which is a national non-profit based out of India. What I wanted to speak to you about is as follows. In our part of the world, and pretty much the global south, communities are facing the onslaught of climate change with recurrent disasters in the same location in a very unpredictable and growing intense manner. Our systems, the humanitarian response systems, no longer hold good. They are archaic in the way they measure impacts, they are time-taking, and are exclusionary in process. So an average family gets only a fraction of assistance they need to recover. Financial or any other in-kind assistance to compensate for loss and damage is still seen as a one-time relief assistance activity, not taking into account that the same communities have been suffering from the disasters over a period of time, and therefore the risks continue to stay with them. So in a sense, we are still doing the 20th century way of responding to one disaster at a time, but not managing the risks that continue to stay. And so we at Seeds started digging into possible solutions, pathways to looking at this problem. Solutions that can first and foremost reach climate finance directly to people and as much or the nature of the assistance that they need. Solutions that are much more new age with innovations around risk reduction and resilience building. Solutions that can pull together the best of the expertise, of course, of the government as the primary duty bearers, but also of the civil society and the private sector. And solutions that can visibilize disasters and people. 90%, and my colleagues from START are here, their report was released just a few days ago, 90% of the disasters are still under the radar and never get reported. So in building the solution architecture, we realized that our starting point has to be an open loss and damage digital platform that allows near real-time 360-degree view of losses, traceable down to the individual household which is in need of assistance. So we are now attempting to build this new platform in India where citizens and not a third party get to report directly on digital platforms the losses they are facing continuously, either from sudden or from slow onset climate impacts. Using AI and other algorithms, the platform is able to generate economic values and non-economic values, quantities, and even sentiments, leading to distress heat maps that can help us prioritize areas of intervention. A platform that can generate actionable insights, leading to a range of innovation and services from anticipatory finance to adaptation to long-term resilience building. And an open platform that allows civil society and markets to work alongside the government, breaking down the institutional silos and building synergies. So I'm happy to report that this platform has been prototyped, presented to the Transitional Committee for the LDF just a few months ago, earlier this year, and is now undergoing development as a mature digital platform. So can it fix the problem? Perhaps not completely. But what it essentially does is it shifts the agency to people. And I think, and I believe that that's the starting point for climate justice that we are battling for. Aditya.
Manu, thank you so much for ending on such a powerful note. Sounds like a really valuable tool. We'll get into it in the question and answers. And for a final lightning talk, we have Lorraine from REAP. Lorraine, the floor is yours. Tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, what is REAP, and then...
Great, thank you so much. So my name is Lorraine Youds. I'm the policy coordinator from the Risk Informed Early Action Partnership. And we have a few members of the partnership here today. And we are a very diverse, big partnership of 85-ish UN organizations, private sector companies, public sector organizations, climate development, peace, humanitarian actors. So we really need to, as you can probably tell from the makeup of who we are, break down those silos to really communicate across them and get across, what we actually mean in terms of risk from early warning systems. From early warnings for different hazards. So I'm here to represent the Risk Communication Working Group of REAP. Mark Harvey from Resurgence is one of the co-chairs of that working group, along with Lisa Robinson from BBC Media Action. And as part of this group, we really try and gain insights on what risk communication means across the 4 different quadrants of early warning systems. So we've been having discussions around how that risk information is transferred, who it's applicable to, how they utilize it. And through these discussions from many diverse partners, we've come up with 5 principles for effective risk communication. And the plan is to apply and test these principles in the next year with agreements of the partners in the working group and see if they hold true. So if we adhere to these principles and if we implement them, does this foster more effective early warning communication, risk communication? So just to go over briefly the 5 different principles. The first one is really thinking about how diverse information ecosystems are. So it's not as being potentially, it's not really the narrative of risk communication from one actor down a chain to an end user. So information ecosystems are very messy, they're very diverse. I think UNDRR published a kind of spaghetti system of how information flows in terms of risk communication. And there's also a UNHCR publication which illustrates the different elements as well of how information flows. So really thinking about the needs of risk information, the utility, the impact that can have, the influence that different actors can have along the way as well. So really trying to include that diversity when setting up early warning systems. The second is around ensuring that early warning systems and risk communication is people-centric. So as we are all aware, or I think we're mostly aware of the 4 quadrants of early warning systems, that inherently breaks us down into silos. But in order to understand how to better communicate risk, we need to really think about the communities at the center of each of those silos and then in between them as well, so where that information is flowing. So thinking about the needs and perspectives of different actors. The third is based on inclusivity of early warning systems. So building inclusivity is something that needs to be done, of course, from the beginning. So having many diverse voices, thinking about different language. That's not just different languages spoken, but what words mean and the semantics behind words. We understand from many different sectors that just simple words can have very different meanings. So really taking that into account. Thinking about things like digital divides as well, so access to information is really important. Where do people access their information? Can they access it? Are there any barriers to that kind of inclusion? The 4th and the 5th principle are really around evidence and the evidence base of your strategic approaches. So when developing risk communication strategies and policies, it should really be based on robust evidence. So your theory of change will hopefully integrate learning from projects that have been undertaken, that have gathered evidence of their impact and that have been proven to work and be effective. And then the final principle is really around that iterative learning. So ensuring that from different implementation of strategies, that you're really feeding back how that impacts risk communication and ensuring that's documented as well so it can be taken up by other actors who are involved in risk communication. So really the message is that in order to facilitate more coherent risk communication, we really need to think about people, very people-centered approach and inclusivity as well, and ensuring that we have this feedback and learning from different approaches that we take.
Great, Noreen, thank you so much for sharing those principles with us. Right, so it's now all of your turn to reflect on what you've heard from the 5 brilliant speakers. Tell us how this relates to your experience, ask us any questions, and please don't let there be the silence of death that usually precedes such requests. And please tell us who you are, where you work.
There we go. Okay. Hi, everybody. My name's Tom Mitchell. I'm from the International Institute for Environment and Development. I think it was a fantastic panel in order to get the insights from each of you, but it's equally about silos to synergies, isn't it? And I would really think that the next set of discussions, it would be great to be able to acknowledge what each of the panelists has seen in the kind of the opportunity to break silos and build synergies with other panelists. But I suppose my question also is about how do we convert a kind of a comprehensive, user-centric, community-driven risk management system equally with a delivery structure, a set of mechanisms that actually get resources to the people who need it most fast in a targeted way, and in a way where each of those systems work such that there is full integration. At the moment, what I'm hearing still is a sense of really quite deep fragmentation. So I'd love to get panelists' reflection on that. Thanks.
We'll take a couple of questions. So I request the panelists who want to answer a question to keep that in mind. Any others?
Hello, everybody. Mark Harvey from Resurgence, working with many of the panelists globally and also on the ground. A comment and a headline. Two things jumped out at me. Was firstly, Manu's reference to sentiment being one of the indicators, as well as a whole set of other indicators around loss and damage. And I think Teresa actually not mentioning data in your presentation, perhaps, but actually through the local coalitions you gather and convene on the ground in Zimbabwe, really encapsulating that diverse, healthy ecosystem, local ecosystem of actors that are absolutely key to the delivery that Tom just mentioned. So it is about convening the actors at the local systems level. I wanted to headline also the fact that there is this kind of process, I think, of relating highly localized data sets and indicators to global processes. And of course, Animesh mentioned one key one, ultimately linked to the Sendai Target E on early warning systems. There's another really interesting one that also captures sentiment, and that is the Lloyd's Register Foundation World Risk Poll that has a disaster resilience data set that does ask communities in 122 countries how they feel, their sense of ability to cope, as well as a lot of questions around their access to risk information and the loss and damages that they're feeling. And I think that's a real opportunity. Some of the organizations working in the room are already working with Lloyd's on that data set and how to use it locally. I think it's a really powerful proxy data set for UN early warning fraud, and it's an example of how we start to connect those really local data sets with more global ones that feed into, I think, the bigger global systems level initiatives, such as UN early warning fraud. So I think there are some really exciting opportunities.
We're going to let the panelists respond, and then we'll take a set of the next set of 2 questions. Anyone wants to respond to? Go ahead, please.
I'd like to respond to the first question about the silos. I think the marriage of GRMA and Global Shield seeks to do just that, which is work with the agencies, with the sectors, with CSOs, to define first the gaps that exist, and then to assess the various financial mechanisms, and then to sort of like design the right solutions that's applicable to the various issues that are raised during the gap analysis. So I think to begin with, that has been a very good approach, and I think that it's something that we ought to absolutely continue. So that's something that I think seeks to break the silos and successfully.
Animesh, would you like to add something?
Yeah, just very quickly reflecting on the 2 sets of questions. One is in context of breaking the silos, and if I have to paraphrase breaking the silos are at 3 different levels, and there could be others as well. One is official data versus other data. Second would be past data, past loss and damage data to future data. And third is aggregated national data versus subnational and local data. And there could be others as well, for sure. And I think there are clear opportunities. I mean, I do see as one of the custodian organizations for SDGs and the custodian for Sendai, we deal only with official statistics. The database that I just presented is all collected by the governments, so they are all official statistics, and we know it is not enough. But then if we talk about accountability, it makes sometimes better sense to use government's own data to set accountability standards rather than using outside data. But at a certain point, we need to converge. And I do believe as we move forward towards better levels of disaggregation, the kind of data that Manu was talking about needs to converge with the official statistics to give a more comprehensive picture. And that is where the role of coordination between the civil society and the governments is important. Past versus future, again, if you move towards, we have a bracket in historical losses. We know where to start, where to end. In the future, we don't have a bracket. It's an open-ended data collection. But that's where we talk about calibration. If we say that in the next 10 years, the intensity of flood will be this much, historical data in the next 10 years will tell you exactly what happened. And that helps us in calibration. So hence, breaking the silos. And third is the level of disaggregation. In most cases, as we start moving from the point of data collection, which is the level of incidence, to upwards on the national level, we start aggregating. Once we have aggregated how many boys, girls, men, women, disabled population into one, we can't disaggregate at the national level, and we lose that big picture of intersectionality of impact and hence the response. And I think these are some of the silos in data that need to be broken. Moving to what, Tom, you asked about, can also the response side be brought together? Yes, I mean, we are gradually moving from the older disinventory system soon to the new tracking system that we are gradually establishing, and we hope that 110 countries will move to the new system very soon. Many countries have already requested that we don't want only to track the event, but we also want to track the response we gave to that, and the system will have that functionality in terms of tailoring it to that requirement. But there is a big challenge there, and the challenge is of the governance. In many countries, the calculation of the official statistics on the numbers is not just determined by how many people actually got affected or how much was actually damaged, but it is the other way around in terms of how much resources was released to address the event. For example, if in a specific incident 10,000 people got affected and the government really says that we will release $500 per person as the cost for relief, and releases only 1 million instead of 5 million, basically it means only 2,000 people would be reached. How that gets divided is another story, but the official statistics for that event will be 2,000 people, not 10,000 people. And that's something which we also need to work on in terms of linking the response better with the actual data which is collected.
Great, thank you. Manu, quick response, then we'll go to further 2 questions.
Yeah, just to quickly respond on these 2 questions. I think the problem of silos is right. The problem goes down to household level fragmentation, because there are different departments, different time factors, timestamps to how the data gets collected. And therefore, a lot of the vulnerability that gets perpetuated is because there is no unified data collection system. So If it is a post-disaster thing, it will be different from a pre-disaster vulnerability, and they would not speak to each other. And so I feel that the building block is at that household level. If we really want to, convert from silos to synergies. And I would just like to reinforce what Mark said about the sentiment. I think what we are seeing now is that official data is able to report losses in the traditional way, but it does not capture distress, right? And because of that, the trigger mechanisms are all misfired, because the official trigger that gets people the relief is based on what are the damages that get reported. And often sentiments never get reported. Whereas politicians rely more on sentiments to take decisions. So there is always this confusion which leads to delay in decisions that stops finance from reaching people directly.
Great, thank you. We have two questions. One was the lady in the yellow. Do tell us who you are, what you do.
I'm audible. Morning, everyone. This is Mestout from CST Ethiopia. Thanks, panelists, for the interesting presentation. My question goes to Dr. Lorraine. You have raised multiple principles that you have designed, and my question goes to the third principle about the inclusivity of early warning information. I guess that is where the challenge comes, mainly in crisis-affected or crisis-prone areas. The communities would have a limitation in terms of having the setup or the logistic for digital information dissemination. So that is something linked with the dissemination of timely early warning information. So the question is, do you have some proven methodology or recommendation for disseminating an early warning or timely information for any related in this kind of crisis-prone areas? Thank you.
We'll come to Lorraine in a second after taking another question. We'll take it from the gentleman with the spectacles behind Tom.
Jeremy Vetterveld from Impact Initiatives. I think what was very clear from the panel and the questions today was that the way you break silos is by working at the community level, at the territorial level. I wanted some experiences from you in terms of how do you bring different actors in the same territory, right? Because I think one of the key challenges we face and we see in a lot of contexts we've worked with, and especially in some of the world's most fragile contexts, is that it's very difficult to bring a variety of government actors, civil society, UN entities to work in the same geography. So a bit of your reflections in terms of where you've seen this kind of common understanding of risk happen and common prioritization of action in the same territories, if you've seen it at all. Thank you.
Great. Manu, I think that question's for you, but we'll first go to Lorraine and then go to Manu.
Thank you very much for the question. So your question, I think, was around early warnings being early enough for people to take action in different crisis areas. And I think my answer to that is there are many different solutions. And I guess what we're learning today is that there are very localized approaches. So there's not necessarily one size fits all. And that will really depend on specifically many different aspects in terms of the specific hazard, the populations and what their vulnerabilities are. So we see that there are so many different layers to understanding what kind of warnings people need and when they need them, when they can take action. So I guess it's just dependent on many different layers, and the risk assessment would need to properly encompass all these things and take into account communications, methods, and what works at a local level as well in those specific contexts. So I can't say that I'm an expert really on those specific methodologies, but that would be my feedback and understanding of how to implement different strategies in different locations.
The next question.
So One of the inspiration of developing this data platform was actually from the COVID response that we saw recently, where the data was really informing institutions across, from governments, when to lift the lockdowns, when to send in the medical source, to civil society to extend help, and for other actors, including the private sector, to ramp up their local supply chains. And all of that was based on a very moving data, day-to-day number of infections, the number of people who are reporting sick. And I think that was one great inspiration of what is really possible.
Great. Suranjana, you had a question, and then we'll take a question from this side of the room that I feel like I've been ignoring. But all the inquisitive people seem to be sitting. No, we have one here. So we'll first go to Suranjana, and then I'll come to you.
Hi. So my question has to do a little bit with the comment that this gentleman made and on the groups at the local level. Sorry, let me put my down. So we've seen in our work, I'm from the Vairo Commission, we work with women's groups. We're seeing all the time that highly localized women's groups are creating and building data sets which are hyperlocal. They are recipients of early warning information. They're also disseminators of early warning information. Like Manu said, during COVID, we could see, in very stark terms, the kind of data they have. They're also entities or groups who are prioritizing risk information, because we know there's a basket of risks that you're dealing with at the local level. And so they are very critical receivers, disseminators, creators of data, as well as the drivers of action, right, to address risk. Yet, in all the discussions on risk information and actions to address those, women's groups or local community-based organizations as aggregators and actors, and also the group that is essentially taking care of lots of vulnerable households, is not in the debate or the discourse at all. So they're kind of invisibilized, yet, governments, NGOs, everybody knows how to go to them and get the information or get the work done when they need to and collaborate. And in fact, they are the ones who are converging lots of different kinds of information and resources and then redistributing them and filling a lot of gaps, including getting things like ID cards made, sending people to get access to social protection or other government programs, taking people to hospitals, to getting tested during COVID, all this work. And there's a cost to that. There's a cost to developing those groups, building those groups, keeping them together, and there's a cost that they are paying out. And none of that is coming into this whole calculus.
Right.
That's my question.
Maybe I'll ask Teresa to reflect on that in a minute, but I'll first take a question. Do please introduce yourself and...
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Annette Detken. Together with Nick Moody, I'm heading the Global Risk Modeling Alliance as a public sector head. And it's not so much a question, but a comment, because I think what has been very clear here in the discussion that we need to break the silos. We need to really have an integrative approach to data and risk understanding in the first place. And there's a huge benefit in having resources on the local level. That is some really basic principles of the GRMA. And since we are at COP, I think it might be worthwhile also pointing to the global risk, the global
the Global Shield Against Climate Risk, that is an initiative that has actually that as a principle to integrate all the resources and stakeholders in one country as a first step to understand risk in a country. And I invite everybody here, also if you know about this, that it's happening in your country, that you join that process, because that's what it takes actually to then integrate and have this overview that we're all missing across silos.
Great, thank you. I might ask Nick to add to that in a minute, but Teresa, do you want to respond to what you heard from Suranjana?
Thank you very much. I think that's the same that has been mentioned by Suranjana. This is actually happens in our communities first because it's so difficult to match the data that we have with our government. Sometimes we are asked to match this and it varies. So yeah, sometimes we are not allowed to mention, to say that the government, what happened. So it differs with our local communities, grassroots communities, because sometimes we are formal and others are informal. So actually, depending on that, it's so difficult to aggregate the data that we have.
Great, thanks. Nick, do you want to add something?
Thank you so much. This has been a fascinating discussion so far. So my name is Nick Moody. As Annette just mentioned, we co-lead this thing called, that you've heard now many times, this acronym, GRMA. It's actually on that banner over there. It's the Global Risk Modeling Alliance. It's a public-private partnership founded by the Insurance Development Forum and the V20 group of the most climate vulnerable countries, funded by the German government through the INSEE Resilience Solutions Fund. And I would love to stress this public-private thing, because that's one of the key messages that we're trying to talk about in this session, about breaking down barriers between organizations and sectors, and between institutions and individuals as well. I would like to thank Manu in particular for raising the question of climate justice, and I'm going to go out on a limb here. This is just a personal view, but for me, the sharing of information is a fundamental issue of climate justice. And one of the things that we notice in our work with countries is that actually there are so many, as Abena said, there's so much data that already exists, but the mechanisms for sharing it are very poor. And there are many different ways of addressing that problem. One of them is to have these mechanisms for simply having organizations talk to each other a little bit better. And so it's a privilege, for example, in our program to be working in countries where ministries are bringing together departments, agencies, CSOs, NGOs, and the private sector within a country in order just to collaboratively talk about not just historical loss and damage, which we've heard lots about, not just early warning, but actually future risk, long-term decisions that affect the well-being of entire communities and helping them to build financial resilience. So there are a couple of principles behind this. One of them is just having those mechanisms for getting people to talk together. Another one is actually a little bit more technical. It's the use of techniques, technology, and particularly open data standards that encourage the sharing of information. Now, not everybody, of course, not every individual citizen has access to great risk systems or data platforms or whatever, but that's not the point. There is, for the people who manage those things, using better open data, shared data formats, where the default should always be that that data is accessible rather than locked behind some licensing barrier, then absolutely that's a key. Finally, I would just like to challenge this idea about silos. Of course, we should all break down silos, but at the same time, it's a natural function of the division of labor that we all have our own specialized areas, right? And I would not presume, as somebody working maybe at a global level, to get involved in the relationship between a government and the citizen. We have to talk about responsibilities here. Who owns the risk? Who owns the responsibility for risk communication with citizens? And so there's always going to be a little bit of centricity, say, you know, we all live in our own worlds, in our own areas of specialization. And I think we should probably reflect that. I applaud the sentiment of breaking down silos, but let's also be very aware of each other's responsibilities and support each other in doing those things.
Thanks a lot, Nick. We have time for the last two questions. We'll go to the gentleman in the last row.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much. My name is Foster from Ghana with the Ministry of Finance and working on a number of these that we discuss. And mine is not a question, but just to make a contribution in terms of the concern raised in terms of how to bring the various stakeholders together, the difficulties that exist, and also in terms of around. I think the most important thing is building a stronger and formidable relationship among stakeholders. That is one of the key things that you can use to leverage. Then the other thing is to look at the opportunity of using champions to be able to bring these people together. It's very key. Otherwise, there are diverse views, there are interests, diverse interests and all that. The other thing in terms of to be able to reach out, because most of the time we're doing the discussion in the technical level, and it's very important that we simplify the discussion when we want to engage at the lower level, because if you leave these things at the technical level, it makes it very difficult. Then in terms of feedback needs to be multiple and also timely. Very key. Thank you.
Right. No, thanks. I think and that aligns a lot with the principles that Lorraine talked about earlier. The final question. To introduce yourself, tell us
of course.
Who you are.
Good morning. My name is Valeria. I am one of the partners of Equilibrium Climate Adaptation Fund. I represent the private sector, and I'm sitting here in the corner. I have two kind of questions, but it's more a question of an opinion. When it comes to silos, the private sector is completely excluded. But we're mentioned at every single panel saying we need to mobilize and catalyze, but nobody actually asks us what we need. And what we need is we do need policies that require resilience being built in when we're rebuilding post-natural shocks, and they don't exist. When we try to rebuild infrastructure that can prevent floodings, that can prevent destruction, that can prevent the livelihoods of communities, we find that governments are lacking. So when we're coming to silos, we need to start moving all together to make that happen, because the communities are at risk and they do not have a voice. The other thing is we work exclusively with local communities, because they are the ones that are affected. And we go in and we rebuild their buildings. But there's the disconnection between local NGOs and the women and their municipalities. Their voices are not present and are not heard. So that's another barrier that needs to be eliminated. And one more thing is the sharing of information and data. I keep on hearing this, but when you're coming from the private sector, you don't get any access. We get access from NOAA in the United States, but we work in Southeast Asia. And so there is enormous amount of private innovation in terms of metrics, data, weather pattern, early warning systems. So if there is a reaching out on the other side and engaging also tech companies who are already doing this work, and how to work with them to get that data to the local communities will be very helpful. Okay. But I really would like from the panelists to hear their opinions about this, because I'm not here to talk about myself. Thank you.
No, thank you so much for voicing the perspective of the private sector. Animesh, do you want to respond to? And then we will go to our graphic artist, who's been very kindly been listening to us and working away to try and capture some of the insights from this.
Yep. So, also to reflect, and maybe this is last 1 minute for closing as well in terms of what my takeaway as well is. I think one key silo that we also need to break moving forward is to connect collection of data with its application. Often we collect a lot of data, but then when we start developing a project or implementing a project, we restart collecting the data for the project when the data already exists. And that is something which we need to recycle, data which already exists in a specific location. Not the best data, but good enough to start implementation. This is something which we really need to move forward doing. Another thing which I noted when, Manu, you were talking about data, what about data on distress and those factors? And that brings us to the gaps in loss and damage. What about non-economic losses? The slow onset events and non-economic losses continue to be a big gap in our loss and damage understanding. We have tried make some efforts towards slow onset events, but non-economic losses, loss of culture, language, cultural heritage, and so on, continues to remain a gap. In fact, I have my views on calling it non-economic loss. It's like quantifying all losses and putting a dollar value to it and then saying everything else is non-economic. It's deliberating the very concept of non-economic. Maybe it's invaluable losses. But coming back to the private sector, I think there are two key issues which we're talking about here. One is the governance mechanism, the fiscal mechanisms which are in place right after, in the aftermath of a disaster or an event. Often we have seen that because of lack of the fiscal flexibility to the communities in the aftermath of an event, the infrastructure which is built is even poorer than it was before the pre-event. And that is something which definitely is a larger governance issue that we need to work on. But more, I will conclude by talking about data access that you were mentioning. All the data that I mentioned in terms of the official statistics, loss and damage data, and so on, are all open source information. It's all in the public domain for 110 countries as of now. But then looking back at the private sector, what about the data held by the private sector? It also needs to come out in the public domain, including insurance data, for example. But at the same time, there is some move going on as of now, and soon you will start hearing about data as digital public good, which is a key push that we are making within the UN system and with Global Compact as well, that we need to move forward towards establishing data as a public good and hence data sharing across different communities.
Great, thank you very much. Hate to end this discussion just when things are getting a bit steamy, but a big round of applause for our panelists. And now we'd love to see how the graphic artist has been able to capture all these discussions.
Hi everyone, I'm a cartoonist from India. I draw cartoons about environmental issues, and it's been a pleasure listening to all of you. Here are the cartoons that I could come up with today based on all that was discussed. Here we go. Here's the first one. Cartoon number 2. Number 3. And the last one, in the hope that this really pumps up your spirits after the debate in the end.
Thank you so much. That's fantastic. It's really fantastic.
Thanks. I'll be sharing these drafts with you, and if you can pick 2 or 3 of the ones that you like the best, I'll keep them furnished and colored for use in your publications and presentations. See you.
Thank you again. Thank you, everyone. Bye.